so we talked about this a little bit, but then there was something else we talked about, and I thought we talked about it. Maybe we didn't get to it. Maybe we just started it. But we talked about the Republican, or the Democrats. Let's talk about the Republicans. What is the charge that the Republicans make against the Democrats? If the Democrats say Republicans are racist, what do the Republicans say about the Democrats?
Radicals.
The radicals. That's right. Anti-American, right? And I think we talked about this. Maybe we did. I'm pretty sure that we did.
Yeah.
How does this come about? Now, we talked about technically, if you really are a radical, in other words, you really don't believe in the system, then are you going to be part of any of these parties? No. By definition, you're not going to be using the party system. Gotcha, no problem. But where does this come from that the association would stick? We kind of understand why people would say Republicans are racist, because if we have defined civil rights as federal money, and you say, I don't want to spend federal money, then you say you're against civil rights. You can kind of see that syllogism. Where's the syllogism under the Democrats' generalization? I use a big word, syllogism, but you guys understand what I mean. Syllogism is when you do this.
Does that have something to do with the civil rights?
That's A equals B equals C. Yeah, it has everything to do with civil rights. Because remember, the Democrats now own civil rights. Even though, as you remember, up until 1963-64, which party really owned civil rights? The Republicans. But after 1965, the Democrats now own civil rights. Yes?
I'm going to go on the limb and guess here.
Okay.
Does it have anything to do with Vietnam?
Excellent question. And I'm going to say no.
Oh.
But
That was my...
it's really important that we talk about this. And we mentioned this just a little bit like the last 10 minutes of class, and I don't know if you caught it, so I want to make sure that you do understand what I mean by this. So we'll just put it up there. But popular perception, the perception is that LBJ loses as a result of Vietnam War. The only problem is that our opinion changes in 1969. When was Nixon elected? 68. In fact, when did LBJ, you guys don't know this, when did LBJ pull out of the election? In other words, he's not running. He was up until this point, and he doesn't anymore. January of 68. So January. Really late, actually, because everyone assumed he was going to run again. And he said, no, I can't run again. So he's pulling out long before there's any question about Vietnam being an issue. It's not Vietnam that causes him to pull out. What's happening that's causing him to pull out? Let's see if I have my... There we go. This is the fun one because my students get to see profanity on the screen. Okay, so why is LBJ not going to be able to run in 68?
Didn't have enough of his own thinking on the whole JFK thing so long, and he knew that it wouldn't work.
Riots! How many of you remember a riot ever? Okay? What do you remember?
Rodney King.
Rodney King, remember that? You're like, what, 6 months old? But close. What do you remember?
What do you define as a riot?
Oh, no.
People overthrowing. Oh, good. Not a riot, though.
Toronto, after
Protest.
they lost the hockey game.
There you go.
Well, is it a riot because they were arresting people for singing
No.
Capitol?
Demonstration. A riot is when you're knocking over cars, you're throwing things through glass windows, fires here and there, people getting shot or hurt or otherwise wounded. Yes?
Give riots within the last year or two?
Okay, if you look outside the country, yes, those would definitely be riots. There's no question about it. Not just the last year or two. The Ukraine, there's riots in the Ukraine just for the last month or two. But not here. Which one were you thinking of?
I was thinking Vietnam when Tet went through. And
Yeah.
Hannah Jane.
Yeah? But did Tet cause riots? We're going to talk about that one. Tet was big, right? This is what I say, the mood changes in 1969. Okay. When we think riots, it's not uncommon for us to think anti-war.
Wasn't there a song about what happened in Ohio?
The Kent State.
Kent State.
Yeah. Really late. By that time, most of the riots have been kind of gone. That was a protest. What's the difference between a protest and a riot? So the protest out in Madison, why isn't that a riot?
It wasn't violent.
Yeah, it wasn't really violent. It was disruptive, but people were basically took control. A riot is when the people get out of control and the police have to kind of cordon off certain areas to prevent it from spreading, and then slowly trying to mollify it. The Watts riots is a huge one in the 60s. I wasn't alive, right? I only know it historically. People are being shot, right? This is LA, huge sections of LA are being burned to the ground because it's just and looting stores and all sorts of stuff. Millions of dollars in damage. Okay. Rodney King riots, if you can remember, people. If you're driving through the town, they're pulling people out of the truck. I remember a video of this guy being pulled out of the truck and almost beaten to death right there. No particular reason. They go into a store and basically break the window and they start just hauling stuff out of it. They burn cars, they overthrow it. That's a riot. Now the fact that we can, in my memory, the only one that I can remember is Rodney King. I'm not that old. I can't remember any of these from the 60s or 70s. I wasn't alive. So what's the point here? Between 65 and 67, 2 years, 1965 and 1967, we have how many? 637 riots. 637. And 2/3 of them are on campus, 471. These are riots, like bombing buildings and stuff, overturning cars, lighting on campus. In my memory, I don't know of any riots on a campus. Not my memory. I'm not that old, right? So, if you've had hundreds in the past 2 years, this catches national attention. Right? This catches huge national attention. Why does this hurt LBJ?
He gets blamed for it.
You what?
He gets blamed for it.
Yes, he gets blamed for it, but why? Why does he get blamed for it?
He's president.
Yeah, okay, but
That's just a civil rights flag.
okay. The thing is that up until 1965, we had the definition of civil rights. And what does civil rights mean? Well, civil rights, in a strict definition, means any right. Somebody was making a joke the other day. It's funny because it's absolutely true, but it goes so much completely contrary to our perceptions that we get shocked by it. But what's one of the largest, longest-running civil rights organization in America?
NCAA.
Nope. The NRA. It's kind of a joke. It's absolutely true, though, right? National Rifle Association. Because your right to bear arms is a civil right. It's the Second Amendment, right? It's as much as important as your right to free speech and the freedom of the press, but we don't think about it that way. Civil rights includes any number of rights that are guaranteed by the government to be protected by the government. But nevertheless, in the 50s, when we said civil rights, we were mainly thinking racial equality. And up to this point, we had, remember, the Civil Rights Act of 64 and then the Voting Rights Act of 65. At that point, what more can you do? I mean, you could do something that might try to ameliorate this situation, but in terms of laws, like making something illegal, saying it's completely illegal and we sue you if you violate it, what more can you do from that? Say we shoot you on sight? I mean, is that really something we're going to do? I mean, that's about as much as you can do. So here we have the civil rights movement, and the public is strongly supportive of this. So much so we know this, that this is what enables the LBJ realignment. So the Democrats own realignment. But then I made this point. You had so many, and I'm going to just call them kids, the baby boomers that are joining this movement in 61, 62, 63. And yet we know, historically, because you guys are now historians, when does this new resurgence of civil rights begin? When was Brown versus Board of Education? 1954. 54. And in order for it to get to the Supreme Court, how many suits do you have to file? Hundreds of them, and they were all filed when? In the 40s. This is a movement that really emerges as a result of World War II. And the reason why I emphasize this is that these kids that joined in 61, 62, 63, they are reaping the benefit of a process that began by their parents. Right? These are the ones that started this. And why am I emphasizing this? Because if you start and you come in late, and then you've done pretty much everything you want to do. The guy who starts in 1940 and he sees the Civil Rights Act in 1965, what does he say? It's been 25 years. It's about time. I've been working on this for 25 years. It's about time. Finally. Now I can sit and rest for a little bit. Good. What about the guy who is 19 years old? I got it done. What more can I do? And you can see that the fact that you have the confluence of this shift plus the baby boomers coming of age right here, then you can understand why the civil rights changes its definition. The first thing is because of LBJ. LBJ does this. LBJ's war on poverty. Civil rights is not just about racial equality. What else is it? It's about economic equality. Now that's a lot more difficult, isn't it? Because if I could pass a law saying you can't discriminate somebody on the basis of race, what law can I do to fix economic inequality? You're poor. Whose fault is it? You're rich. Clearly you stole it from somebody. You're going to go to jail, right? No wealthy people allowed? I mean, we laugh, right? You should laugh. What law can you do to fix economic inequality?
Education.
Well, LBJ is not a radical. Don't get me wrong. He's a traditional, what you just call an economic liberal. The financial, federal money, that's what we're going to use. And so, by making this, his solution is federal money, right? Okay, well, what if you're 18, 19 years old, and you look around and you say, look, you know, we passed this law, but I went down to the South, I still saw a fat-bellied police officer being just himself. And I see all these people being, you know, racist and bigoted, and I see poverty, and there's still poverty around there. Why hasn't it changed yet? It's been 18 months. Now, I'm kind of joking, because we're going to have a massive revolutionary change in 18 months. No. But if you were able to be a part of that process, and in your own 18 months, boom, you get these two laws, can't we do anything? We should have, and the fact that it hasn't changed, we start thinking other ways. And the way we start thinking, we take this idea, if the economy is the reaction, or is what is responsible for racism, then maybe it's even deeper than that. The radical ideology is that capitalism is source of oppression. Now the funny thing about this is that in 69 and 70, this is a radical idea, because what it means is that we have to change the system. You have to truly destroy what we have. We have a free market capitalist society. We have to destroy that system in order to guarantee true equality. Our definition of civil rights, then, in this idea, is not really race at all. Civil rights is kind of anti-capitalism. Now, the reason why I say this is funny, have you heard that even today in some of your academic classes? Yeah. Where do you think this comes from? Why is it important that 471 of these occurred on campus? What did those students do? Take this with a grain of salt, please. Don't repeat this like 20 years from now. So, yeah, Dr. Zorea said this. There is a correlation, and there actually are studies for this, but this is one of these things you just take for as a demonstrative purposes. You get a deferment, so you don't get drafted if you're in college student. Now, not everybody, but a good number of them. So if you don't want to be drafted, what should you do? Go to college. Now, let's say you don't care at all about being drafted. Then what might you do? You might enlist, right? How many people in Vietnam are enlistees?
Really low.
Very, very tiny number, or almost half or more?
There was quite a few.
Almost half or more.
Patriotism was big.
Very big. That's exactly right. Very big. Now, in our brain, because frankly we don't have the draft, you guys think, I would rather die than be drafted. Okay? Times have changed. The fact of the matter is quite a number of people volunteered. You had drafting, but you also had enlistees, a large percentage. I don't know if it's exactly half or more, but very close. It rivals it. And so then we have this situation where the people that are going to try to avoid the draft are not equally represented in society, right? And if you want to continue to avoid, it's not just 18 to 22, because you get out of college, what do? You get drafted, right? So in order to really avoid, what do you have to do? You got to go to grad school, right? And you got to stay there for like 10 years. Well, the war's not that long. So these guys that are on campus, many of them are the next professors. Now, if you talk to a professor that actually graduated in 69, 70, 71, 72, they will tell you that I'm not lying about this. They will be actually proud of that because they're probably one of those things. It's one of those guys you look back and say, yeah, we were in the future. If that's the case, and these guys are writing these books, then how are they going to reinterpret some of these events? Okay, I'll set that aside. The fact of the matter is, this is not as unusual to you today as you might expect. But in '69, this was a radical idea. The idea that we define civil rights as anti-capitalism. So radical, in fact, that remember I mentioned you have conservatives, you have liberals, and then you have the radicals. In terms of the party, and this is not easy, so please take this with a grain of salt. Who's most likely to be conservative? Democrats or Republicans? Republicans. But please keep in mind, you have lots of liberal Republicans. Okay? So just because you're more likely doesn't mean that the whole party is that way. Who's more likely to be liberal? Democrats or Republicans? Democrats. Again, especially in the 70s. Don't be confused. Some of them are going to be conservative also. It's not as cut and dry as it is today. Which party are the radicals going to be? Neither. They're not going to be in a party, right? And so these ideas are not conducive to either party. I think I mentioned this. In 1968, you had the Chicago Riots. Huge riots in 1968. The Chicago 7, have you ever heard of that? Abby Hoffman, you ever hear these names? These guys are part of the riot of 1968. If you have any movie done about the late 60s, Hollywood always loves to talk about the Chicago riots of 68. Who are they rioting against? The Democratic National Committee, the Democratic National Headquarters. It's their Democratic National Convention that was in Chicago that year. Why would the radicals be protesting the Democrats?
Not enough change.
Why did I say that?
Not enough change.
Not enough change, absolutely. They didn't go to the Republican National Convention. There was no riots outside the Republican National Convention. Why?
They weren't trying to change.
There's no expectation. There's no possibility that they're going to do. But for these guys, they've already say that government can be active. Why not just take that little extra step and say, maybe the government can actually be used to totally dismantle the system? And so you have real conflict. And the conflict is between the radicals and the liberals, not between liberals and conservatives. Why is this relevant? It's really relevant because we're talking about a syllogism, right? The connection. We have 637 riots. And please, understand, does this mean that everybody that's involved with these riots are radicals? When I saw this under Rodney King, and you guys were like 3 days old or something, okay, you're looking at the Rodney King riots, and there's these guys that are just coming out of the store with a big television. This is before flat screens, so I mean like 2 people carried out these big televisions. Okay, what was the supposed idea? Well, the supposed idea was that the officers who were violent to Rodney King were not guilty. They weren't found guilty, and so this causes everybody to be angry. Do you think the guy going out of the store with the big television really cares 2 cents about Rodney King? Why is he going out to the store with the television?
Hey, they're rioting. No
Free.
one's watching.
It's free, right? I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with the political. So when we talk about these riots, do all these guys have to be radicals? No. In fact, it's a very, very few people that have to be radicals. Nevertheless, when people are watching this on their television screens, who do they blame for it? The radicals. Okay? And so you've got all this. So what you have here, if we go put the nice syllogism. So the Democrats own civil rights. Civil rights now means radicalism. It doesn't mean racial equality. And this is by 65 to 68. And part of this is LBJ's own doing, unintentional. Please, don't get me wrong. He had no desire to have any of these riots. But by linking race with poverty, he's basically saying until we fix the economic system, we're always going to have oppression. It doesn't take much then for radicalism to be the new definition of civil rights. Even though, and I'm going to put this over here, this is a tiny minority. You talk to your grandparents or whoever the age is that would be around here. For me, it would be my parents. They were in college during this year. Do you think any of them were throwing bricks and bombs and doing any of that stuff? No. Now, I shouldn't say that too much because Spring Green is only 20 miles away. So some of the guys may have had Madison, well, but still, the majority of the country was not in favor of this. It doesn't reflect the majority. It's really just a tiny minority of people. I keep emphasizing. Does anybody know why I keep emphasizing that this radicalism is just a tiny minority? And this is a syllogism, remember? A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. What should be the last line now?
Democrats are radicals.
Democrats are radical, right? You get that, right? This is where we get it. Now, I mentioned this is a tiny minority. Why am I emphasizing this?
Because they were retired Democrats.
Okay, that's part of it, but what else?
They changed the attitude of America.
Why does Nixon win in 68?
Everyone thinks Democrats are crazy radical.
They're being convinced by it, right? Now, he doesn't win by a landslide, but he wins with a comfortable enough lead that it's pretty solid, right? So we get the idea, we entertain the idea that Dems are more likely to be radical, okay? And then, 1972, Nixon has the largest landslide in history. What does he do between 68 and 72?
He promotes that Democrats are radical,
Yeah.
I guess.
Does he get rid of the Great Society? No, he doesn't. And so then he has really no racism evidence because he's not really cutting federal spending. But what does he do? He does emphasize law and order. I have a book that hasn't been published yet because I'm waiting on it, but it's on the Organized Crime Control laws. 2 laws, Organized Crime Control Act of 1968 and the Safe Streets Act in 1968 and the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970. That's Nixon's baby, right? This is where RICO, Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations statute. Anybody heard of RICO? This is where we get to capture bad guys, right? In the 80s, we also used this to capture like white-collar criminals, but at the time, it's all about bad guys. They have what's called a strike force, which we hadn't used at all before, but today we use it constantly. Does anybody know what a strike force is? I should say not strike force. You guys are going to be confused. Task force. Strike force is a military term. Completely different. What's a task force? Well, it's not all that completely different, but it's a military application. What is a task force? No, that's why I should have said strike force. Specialized group that includes what? People from all sorts of different agencies. It's a special group focusing on a particular problem with everybody who's good at it. So we don't just have the New York Police Department or the FBI or the organized crime guy. We have a little bit of all of them. They all talk to each other. This has genuine effect. The crime rates go down. Property crime, violent crime go down. There's no riots, very few riots. It doesn't immediately stop, but much fewer than what we had in 65 and 67. So what we basically see here is success. And so he wins on a landslide. And it's that success, not in terms of economics, an economy is okay, but in terms of the issue that was most pressing on people, which was law and order. And so they come out in force. And just like LBJ kind of smears the Republicans with this idea of racism, Nixon successfully is able to take the Democrats and say, these guys, if they're not radical, if we were to say which party is going to be more likely to coddle a criminal versus which one is going to be more likely to punish a criminal. The Democrats are associated with coddling, right? I am using this terrible word, right? And the Republicans, they're enforcing it, right? Go ahead.
I just took a psychology quiz that it was about the Big Five personality, and they asked these exact questions like, "Do you think criminals should?" That's just funny.
And they're not connecting it with this political connection, but that really is it, right? Okay, so